get on the yoga mat, first warrior 2, she puts us in, and I felt like the world shifted. Every cell in my being was like, yes. I felt powerful, I felt free, I felt strong, I felt like present. All the things that, people crave, I think, in life, I felt in that one moment.
Welcome to Guys Talking Yoga, a podcast created to help inspire more men to consider the practice of yoga by sharing the stories and paths of other guys. Hey, what's happening, everybody? Larry Milburn here, guest hosting, sitting in the hot seat for Derek, who is currently out. I want to thank you so much, Derek, for letting me jump in here and take over a couple of episodes for you. It means a lot. I'm a big fan of the show. Guys, we've got an incredible episode today. We have a great guest, Matt Giordano, the Yogi Matt, as he is known. This gentleman is pretty special in the yoga world. He has been in multiple TV shows, made many appearances around the world in teacher trainings and workshops. He's from Seacliff, Long Island, and he's just incredible, man. He's created quite the yoga empire. He's a hockey player, was a former rock star, so he's really coming at this through a lot of different lenses. Yoga changed his life completely, and he's really carved out a pretty wonderful path for himself. And it was very cool to get to sit down with Matt, break down his journey into yoga, how he found it, the benefits of it, how it's helped shape his current hockey career. He plays about 2 to 3 nights a week still, and just how it's given him a really great sense of body awareness and how to take care of himself and sort of fix his own injuries if they should come up. So I hope you enjoy the episode again. Derek, big shout out to you, buddy. I hope you're having a great summer. Thank you for letting me sit in the hot seat once again. We've got a great couple of episodes for you. So enjoy this episode with Matt Giordano. Well, we're going to jump right in here. I was going to hit your history a little bit and how you came to yoga, but let's jump into this. As you're playing hockey, what has yoga done for your awareness of your body on the ice? Because I'm sure that there are a lot of guys listening who are probably in similar type leagues, whether it's a baseball or softball league or touch football, whatever it is, hockey.
Yeah.
So how have you found that yoga's helped your awareness when you're on the ice?
Well, it's so interesting. We can go on a few different levels here, but physically speaking, what I think is fascinating for me now when I'm playing hockey, and there's a big gap between when I played hockey when I was younger, and then I was full-time yoga practitioner and teacher for a long time, not playing hockey, and then when I came back to the ice, there was a whole different physical body that I'm working with. One, I'm a lot older. But 2, I have a tremendous amount more body awareness, which is really a fascinating experience. So when I was younger, my body, to me, was just the thing that got the puck to do what it did. But I never really thought about my body. I just thought, how do I get the puck to move, or how do I get from point A to point B? And I didn't think about the mechanics of what was going on, what muscles I was using, or how to articulate an ankle joint to get better propulsion and better speed, or how I could turn out my thigh bone or turn it in a little bit to access different musculature. And now that I have that level of awareness in my body, it's incredible to see my patterns. So for example, I know that my stick is on my right side. I know I'm right leg dominant, and as a result, I have a tendency to overuse my right hip. But with a sensational awareness that I've gained through yoga, I can now transfer a lot of that force into my left hip so that it does more work than it normally would. And then as a result, I skate much faster. Additionally, I know that my left ankle has a tendency not to rotate as much as the right. And so if I want to turn harder, I have to think harder on my left side to rotate the ankle in order to get the right crossover. So generally speaking, my increased body awareness has improved my skill set on the ice. And I don't have to wonder why I can't do something. I can figure it out now.
Yeah. Do you find you have more power because your body's distributing that, right? If you're not just pushing on the right hip, you're using both hips now.
Yeah, it's more efficient. I have more power. I'm faster, and I'm also certainly more agile, obviously with the flexibility and whatnot. I think when I played sports when I was younger, everything was a thought process of outside myself. It was all about, the puck, the stick, and the other people, the ice, the space in front of me, and not as much about what was going on internally. And that lack of attention to what was happening physically inside of me, I think held me back in a lot of ways. And just now I'm better than I ever was as a hockey player because of that skill set, that I can go to my body, assess what I can do better. And now when I'm looking at the rink and I'm trying to move the puck in a different way, or I want to pass in a different way, it's not an external thing, it's an internal thing. And that has really helped me out a lot.
So you've got all that internal awareness, which is awesome. But obviously in yoga, right, we're also working to slow things down a little bit and breathe. So how has your breath work and the ability to just calm your mind a little bit and dare I say, get in touch with the force a little bit more as you're skating, right? And seeing things, or seeing where someone could be, anticipating because you're slowed down mentally a little bit. Tell me a little bit about that.
When I was at my best, when I was younger, I had those moments already within the athletics. So I think that was one of the big draws for me as an athlete, was that I got into the moment, into the zone where almost you're thoughtless and it's just like things slow down. I remember when I was real young, I scored a goal, and I remember the process of scoring this goal. I remember just seeing in slow motion the goalie moving one way, and I just knew to release the puck the opposite way. And replaying that back in my mind, I remember at that young age being like, what was that I could like slow down time? So I think to be honest, I had many tastes first of this, stillness before I came to yoga. And then yoga just gave me the tools to kind of get there in other ways and to get there more often. But what it does for me now, let me just go to the breath for a second before I go to the mind. I actually wear a watch that tells me my heart rate. And this is kind of fascinating. Yes, you can, of course, part of the yoga practice is to try to sense your heart rate. But when I watch the watch after I get off of a shift, I can see what my heart rate is. And then I can see how fast I get back towards resting heart rate. And if it's a slow decline, if it's taking a while for me to calm down breathing wise, I know ways in which I can breathe. For example, taking a slow deep inhale and really elongating the exhale is going to give me slow down my heart rate faster than if I'm just panting. So I employ different breath techniques when I'm on the bench, especially to recover faster, so that when I get back out on the ice, I can be at my best. So that part is a lot of fun for me, especially having the feedback of seeing what my heart rate is currently. And I think part of that which is exciting, is a lot of times you can feel a certain way, or you're not sure if you feel a certain way. And then you get that digital feedback that either the way that you feel is the truth or it's not. So I do like the combination of that, sensing plus also having the feedback from a watch to tell me. On the flip side, on the mental aspect of things, when we're talking about mentally, when I'm looking at the watch, if I'm seeing that I have a high heart rate and I'm feeling a little bit of panic, it gives me a little bit of validation. Okay, you're feeling a little bit of panic because your heart rate is so high. That I think if you're not a hockey player and you're listening to this podcast, you're sprinting all out, and then you rest for a short period of time. And then you go back out and you sprint and you work as hard as you can. So it's a really intense sport in that it brings you to that cardio type break where you feel like, if you're playing the way that I play, which is with high intensity. Of course, not everybody out there is playing in that way, but for me, that's the fun part. I really like that intensity. And it's something that I think I was missing for a while that I've gotten back to with the hockey practice. And it's given me a level of practice from a yogic perspective to get to the threshold of discomfort mentally, in that I feel my heart is beating really high and I can feel my emotions then follow suit, right? Because there's an energetic shift, then your emotional quality and thought process follows that energetic shift. And I can then, as the yoga practitioner in me, can witness these two things happening. Okay, you're thinking this way because the heart rate is this high. I can take a breath, do my best to calm down the heart rate, and at the same time recognize that the quality of thoughts or the chaos of the mind or emotions that are going on is not because I'm crazy or something mentally is wrong, but it's simply because I'm at that high intense heart rate. And then I can start to control the way that I'm thinking from that perspective, and I can calm myself down in many ways.
Yeah. What do you find are some of the benefits of a more balanced and cross sort of athletic thing, right? Like a lot of folks or guys think like, I go to the gym. That's what I do. I'm not going to go to yoga because that's going to stretch me. I don't want to stretch. I want to bulk up, right? Or I'm just going to go to yoga. I'm not going to go to the gym. Or I'm not going to play hockey. Or I'm just going to play hockey. Or I'm just going to cycle, right? We were talking about like the cyclists up here in the Northwest Hills of Connecticut. They ride, nobody stretches. I got a lot of their spouses and wives and partners saying, God, I wish my husband would come to your class. He could just like benefit from stretching after cycling. What do you think are the benefits? What would you say are the benefits of like yoga and weightlifting, yoga and hockey and yoga, right? Adding these things into your life and opening your mind to it's all good and one can inform the other.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things within that I think need clarity if we were to go, just have this conversation. First, there are lots of different types of yoga and different types of practices within the umbrella of yoga. Just like there's different types of, let's say, body weight training versus weight training. There's many different types of fitness. There's many different types of yoga. So I think most people would probably agree that the body requires multiple ways of training. Even when I was just a yoga practitioner and I didn't do anything else but yoga, I knew that other pieces of the puzzle were missing. And that's not to say you can't get stronger in yoga. My strength is largely built on yoga and yoga practices. However, a lot of people use yoga for flexibility only, or some people use it predominantly for strength. Some use it for cardio. So there are many ways in which you can practice yoga that could target what you need. But I think most importantly is that as practitioners of our body, let's call it, students of our body, the body is designed to do multiple different types of movements. And if we're not doing a certain category, we're always going to find, deficiency. We're out of balance. We're not quite. So something's always going to feel like it's missing. For me, before yoga practice, coming into the yoga practice, I had tremendous amount of low back pain, right knee pain, and left shoulder pain. And the back pain was the biggest issue. And what yoga taught me was how to, one, strengthen my back muscles in a way that finally gave me some relief in my low back, but two, it also gave me the flexibility of the hips that was really more the root cause of the low back pain. So because I was a hockey player, I was also a snowboarder, I was a wakeboarder, I did skateboarding, I did pretty much a lot of these right hip dominant kind of sports. Yeah. And as a result, my right hip was really locked up. My left hip was okay, but my right hip was super tight. Now, I didn't know that until I was doing a posture called pigeon pose on the left side and on the right side. I can see the significant difference in flexibility between the left and the right. Yeah. And when I did pigeon pose on the right side, my right knee was screaming. I couldn't get into the pose. My left side was like, man, it's okay. And as I learned the body, biomechanics, anatomy, and how to approach a posture like pigeon pose and improve hip opening, I focused on my right side and improved the flexibility of that side. And that, in combination with strengthening my back muscles, released my low back pain. And I mean, that in itself feels miraculous, because I know a lot of people struggle with pain in their back and either in their neck and shoulders or in their low back is the common areas. And we may never know that the cause of it is coming from your tight right hip. You don't feel it in your hip. I never felt right hip pain. Right. I didn't even notice my right hip was tight. Wouldn't have ever known if I didn't have a practice that pushed me into exploring things that I don't normally do. Right. And that's the one thing that can happen is if you get caught up in one sport or one way of training, cyclist, for example, when I was actually, oddly enough, one of my biggest career boosts were because the studio that I taught at was below a Soul Cycle. And I became known a little bit as the injury guy. You go to me if you have an injury. And the most common people that would come to me were the people that were upstairs in their Soul Cycle. They did that 5-6 days a week, and they'd come down and they all have the same pain. It was in their low back or their knee or whatever it was. But those were the two most common. And I knew right away, oh, you do Soul Cycle 5-6 days a week. I knew their pattern. It was that's an easy assessment.
Movement,
okay.
Right?
Same repetitive movement.
Yeah.
I know you're going to be tight in your psoas. And, I know that you're probably rotating your right or left leg outward a little bit too much, but your foot is strapped in there. So your knee is getting, the torque of that. You don't know it. You don't see it. Maybe your coach perhaps will be able to see it and show you, but we have to retrain those muscles so that if you're, let's just for example, if your right knee is always going out to the right, it probably means your external rotators in your right hip are overactive and your internal rotators aren't balancing that out. So if we strengthen your internal rotators and we stretch your external rotators, you're likely to find a lot more balance in that hip. And then eventually you can track that knee straight ahead without thinking about it as you build a new pattern. And then you feel a lot better in your soul cycle or whatever it is that you do, your regular cycling.
Yeah.
And you feel stronger. You're going to feel that the thing that you're doing is healthy rather than hurting you. And your hobby is now all of a sudden healthy again and exciting. Whereas sometimes if you keep going in one direction, you don't understand why you've got pain or discomfort. There's part of you knows that, you're doing one thing over and again, and the other part of you is defending that thing that you're doing,
right?
Just because you love it so much.
Right.
That happens with yoga too. If you only do yoga for long periods of time, and that's the only sport or athleticism that you're doing, you will develop patterns that will cause pain. There's not one thing better than the other. It's the cross-training idea that's super important because the body isn't really designed to do one thing. So we need to have a wide array of movement practices, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I mean, as I mentioned, I've been teaching for a while now, and once I discovered yoga in the 90s in Los Angeles, where I started, because I was a 3-letter varsity athlete in school, all that kind of stuff. It's time in the gym, which I just never really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the sports, but I didn't, I was not a gym guy. And then once I discovered yoga, it was like such an awakening of things that I was like, it's the thing I've done the longest that has continually brought me joy to do.
Yeah.
But only until recently, in my early 50s, have I started to realize, like, I might have to add some other things in because I drive a lot. I do a lot of things that aren't helpful and that are weakening certain things. And if I'm, teaching a lot of sun salutations or whatever, it's only a certain thing that you're moving, right? And a lot of times now I don't practice with my students as much as I used to. I'm trying to work on teaching my students practices for me, right? And go around and help them. Anyway, so I've really come around to like, okay, I've got to add some things in. And I can notice too, right? I can notice in Ardha Chandrasana, my right hip is like, doesn't feel quite as strong as my left, which is my dominant side. So that would be half moon pose for all of you listening. I threw out a little Sanskrit there. All right, dude. Well, now let's pull back a little bit and get a broader view of you and your practice and how you came to yoga. I think your mom was a yoga instructor, yeah?
My stepmother.
Your
actually.
stepmother.
Yeah, my
That's
stepmother
how you got into it in the city, yeah?
It was started off on Long Island, actually. So I was in a band for many years, and I was 8 years on the road touring with this band. We were called Stealing Jane, and we had some moderate success as an independent band, and we were doing quite well. But
What'd you play? Were you singing?
I was a lead guitar player, backup vocals, but
Cool.
It's a challenging lifestyle. Look, we weren't the kind of band that were partying all night long or anything like this, but even still, the amount of time that you're spending in a van, we were 8 guys, so 8 guys in a van, in traffic all the time, eating the worst food, the highest of highs when you're on stage and you're getting all this validation, applause, and people screaming the songs and they love you and whatnot. But then the lowest of lows where you feel completely alone. It's such an interesting, challenging lifestyle, I'll say that, especially at the young age that we were at. We started right in senior year of high school and kept going through college, and I dropped out of college in order to continue with that. So yeah, we had a good run, but there was there was an overlapping period of a few years where I went to school at Berklee College of Music, and a book that I picked up was called Effortless Mastery. Effortless Mastery was essentially a book about the ego within musicians that we all kind of struggle to work with inside, whether we're good enough or thinking about that one solo that we had, and we try to identify with that one really good solo, but there's hundreds of others that don't match up, and that feeling of constantly chasing something makes you always feel deficient. Anyway, this book was where I started meditation, because it gave you some meditation practices and self-reflective techniques in order to witness the difference between being in the now versus being in this kind of thought process of what I could be or what I should be, and just getting caught up in this world of ego. So the book was a start for me. The author is Kenny Warner, I should say. The book was the start of mindfulness, let's say, or presence. And that I read earlier on in my music career, or let's say midway, and it started this process of self-reflection. And at the same time, that self-reflective tool that I was refining wasn't strong enough in comparison to the lifestyle that was feeding the ego. And when I say ego, I don't mean necessarily like arrogance but meaning identity that becomes the struggle. That could be arrogance, or that could be, the I'm not good enough or whatever. It manifests in many different ways. And what happened for me was I was on this wave cycle of validation and applause and excitement to this real deep loneliness on the flip side. And while I was trying to self-reflect on that, I wasn't strong enough yet to see what was happening, that, the outside life that I was living had greater power than the internal world that I was cultivating. I wasn't quite there yet to be living a lifestyle like that and be able to hold my center. So what happened was I became a person that I didn't want to be, yet I wasn't quite aware that I was that person, right, even though I'm practicing this self-awareness tool and self-inquiry. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you're not blind. Yeah. So my friends, all of my bandmates, called a meeting and told me like, hey, we don't like the person that you've become. And essentially they just said, if you don't change, then we don't want you in this band. And for me, that hit like a ton of bricks, because I had dedicated my entire, all of my energy to being with these guys. They were my best friends. They were the band that my hopes and dreams were all wrapped up in this, so we had,
that's tough, dude.
Yeah, it was a rough moment. And I, of course, was angry at first. I felt defensive.
Sure.
And I wasn't sure if it was coming from all of them or if it was coming from one who was convincing the others, So then I asked each of them if they felt that was true. And I remember coming around to one of the guys in the band that I just trusted wholeheartedly, and he reluctantly, but he agreed. He had to, he said, yeah. He's like, said, I love you, but
you're a dick.
Yeah, exactly.
You can play the guitar, but you're a dick.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good guitar players out there.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And I had a moment. The next day, I was thinking like, oh, I'll just find new friends. I'll find a new band.
Of course, it's the ego just kicking right in.
Yeah,
right?
Just gonna run away from this.
Yep.
And I had a moment of clarity. That was the first real moment of clarity where I had this kind of epiphany where it felt like someone outside of me was speaking, or we can say inside of me, however you want to say it. There was another voice, and it said, well, you could find new friends, you could find a new band, you could find a new girlfriend, but if you don't change, you're going to wind up in the same place. And that moment of clarity, that epiphany that happened was what shifted the course of my life, because I realized that it sounded so true, and it was true, that if I don't change, I can do this all over again, but I'm going to wind up in the same place. It's going to be a waste of time. So why not just change who I am and what how my behavior, my actions and whatnot. And that's what I did. I started this practice of, I knew one of the things that a lot of people hated about me was that I was very argumentative. I had to be right. I had this red heat fire in my ears. I remember when I just had to feel right. And that, by the way, is the ego. Most people, we can argue, would rather be right than be happy. And that's usually the source of our unhappiness, which is ridiculous. So we push other people away because we need to be right. We don't realize we're doing it. Anyway, so this was my biggest war. It's like, okay, how do we resolve this? This was square one.
And you're teaching a bit at this time, or you're just
at
practicing?
This time? I'm not yet. I'm about to come to the point where I become a yoga teacher, but I'm still in the trying to discover who I am and how I can be better. So meditation and self-inquiry came first, though it was not, it was a messy practice. It was not a regular thing. It was just the tool. I knew I had it, didn't know how to use it so well. But when this happened, it gave me a real battlefield, I would call it, because it wasn't a peaceful practice yet. It was a war between me and me. And when I felt the need to be right come up, I would first argue with myself internally and see if I could defend the other side of the equation, what the other opinion was, until I felt like I was right on both sides. So this appeased the ego because the ego needed to be right. But it softened my opinionated viewpoints because instead of just arguing with other people outwardly, I first had the argument with myself, which is a violent way to go about it, but it was necessary path to getting to a place of open-mindedness.
Was this a technique you had read about, or is this like, this is what she's like, no, this is how Matt's going to do it?
I don't, it just was happening, and I'm only able to talk about it now in retrospect and, as to what happened and how it worked. But in the moments, I don't really know how to...
Humility.
Yeah. I guess it was a path towards humility. I don't know why I knew that argumentative side was important, but, in looking back, I can say that argumentative side was a stronghold that the ego had on me.
Yeah.
And I guess intuitively, you can call it, knew that was a part of this bigger equation. I don't know if I could connect the dots then as to why and all that, but certainly now it makes a lot of sense. But that was the start. I was arguing with myself until I became the point of neutrality, which I remember like about a year later, the singer of my band turned to me and we were having an internal argument with the band. And he turned to me and he said, well, Matt, you usually have kind of like, you usually understand both sides of the opinion. Like, what's your thought process? And I had a moment of like, wow, that's a big difference that he just saw in me, that I look at the two sides instead of the one, because it's almost like he forgot that I was that person or that I was that way. So
we should clarify. So you stayed with the band for another couple of years?
I changed and they accepted the change.
Okay.
For many years after that.
Cool.
Yeah, I think things went in the right direction. And that process led me to, I guess we can call it a form of prayer, inquiry, whatever we want to call it, but that was a little bit more deeper and more profound. And what the next big trigger point in my life was, we were in the studio for a while. We recorded an album, and the producer of that album passed away unexpectedly. And we were at his memorial, and he was always barefoot, and also always ate like vegetables and no meat, and like was very clean with a lot of things he did. It was very strange. I thought it was weird. And he had this group of friends at his memorial that were all oming with singing bowls and doing these chanting things. I thought it was the weirdest thing. Wow. And I remember standing there barefoot, because in honor of him, we were all barefoot. And I remember thinking, what a bunch of weirdos. But at this point in time, I was getting faster and faster at that self-reflective tool.
Right.
You
were becoming a weirdo yourself.
Yeah, well, no, not yet. I was on the verge of becoming a weirdo. And I said to myself, I go, well, hey, they might be weirdos, singing, chanting, oming, whatever. But this was the guy you admire's friends and trusted people. And this was his crew.
Yeah.
And he was weird. And for some reason, I always felt like I looked up to him. I felt like his strangeness was what made him so relaxed in his being. And, so that moment of recognizing that I was just judging these people for no reason. I just, I had no other reason other than maybe that was kind of passed down to me from society, saying that those people are weird and we're not weird.
Right.
In the moment that I recognized and I just gave up the judgment, something happened where my life changed forever. It was a moment of absolute presence. I listened to the sound of Om. I heard I felt the vibration inside of me. And then suddenly I opened my eyes again and the world was vibrant. I remember like everything was in Technicolor. It was like the trees were wild shades of green. I remember seeing a bird from afar that seemed like it was bright orange. Who knows what color actually it was, but everything, it felt like the newest form of HD television. And this was, at least we're talking about 17 years ago, maybe more. So the vibrancy was crazy. And I remember hearing somebody shift from their left foot to their right foot. And they were like, a few aisles over from where I was. And a twig just kind of like snapped slightly underneath someone else's foot. And everything came alive. The world came alive in such a huge way for the first time in my life. And I was scared, excited, nervous, curious, awake. I was just awake and I didn't know what to do with all of that. And that feeling and awakeness lasted for 2 weeks. I felt like every leaf I saw, every bird was, every piece of nature was just talking to me in English and giving me information. It was like I was just one with the universe in this, in this weirdo type of way that I didn't want to tell anybody else about, because who's going to understand that the leaf is talking to you? That was just a weird concept. Even now, I wouldn't say that to, most people, except, people that are on this path, typically. I mean, I'm happy to say it, but also recognize that sounds weird, right?
Right.
And so what that led me to was me speaking to Brian, and Brian became a mentor. Brian's dead. Brian became my mentor. He had all the answers to every question that I ever asked. Sometimes it would take 5 minutes of sitting in silence until the answer would come. Sometimes it would be very clear, spelled out in English. Other times it was like magnets would fall off of the refrigerator and then give me the sign I was looking for, which also sounds really weird. I recognize that. But at the same time, this was happening all around me and I was getting these crazy answers. And I was able to also, I started playing around with what I now know as manifestation. I was trying to create things in my life from asking Brian to create it. I think people use prayer in that ways. I'm not religious, so I apologize. I don't really know if people pray in this way, but I think when I was younger, I remember experimenting with prayer, being like, please God, if you could, just let me out of school today so I can
get that red bicycle.
Yeah. But I was using this kind of prayer methodology, I suppose, to create certain circumstances. And so one time I'm at a sunset on the beach, and I live in this 1 square mile of town where you always know everybody. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I just need to meet somebody new. I'm lonely. All I know is these guys in the band. And I pray for someone, and I prayed for a girl specifically, thinking that, I needed a love interest. And I go home, take a shower, come back like about an hour later, and there's one person on this beach, and it's a female. Okay, you asked for a girl. There's a female on the beach. Well, who knows? Let's walk by. I walk by awkwardly. It's a huge beach, and there's one person on it, and I walk pretty close to her.
Maybe too close.
Probably too close. I walk past, and I'm a timid guy. I don't really speak to strangers very much. I'm kind of a shy person. So I go past her, go down to the water, and I step into the water, and I look up at the sun, and I got the clear message that says, well, you can ask for things, but you still have to take action. And I was like, oh no. So I go back. I didn't know at the time she was crying. I was too much in my head to be.
You're talking to Brian.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't even talking to Brian at that moment. I was just like, how do I speak to another human being I don't know?
Yeah.
And all of my self-consciousness just like drummed up, and I said mumbles, and she looked up at me, and I only know this from her perspective from telling the story later on, that she was crying about her life and feeling like she was kind of in this place of struggle, internal struggle, and not knowing which way to go. And I'm not going to get into her story. Anyway, she very kindly was like, what? What was that? And I stumbled over some words again, and we got into a conversation, it was pretty clear right off the bat that this wasn't a romance. It was something much more important, and I didn't really know what that was. We chatted, and then I said, like, well, is there any way we can like stay connected? And moments after that find out that she's rooming in my best friend's house at the time. And I was like, oh. So I ran into her a bunch of times after that. And eventually I was like, can we meet up? And she finally agreed. She's like, okay, yeah, let's meet up. And we set a spot. And she just said to me, she goes, tell me one thing this is the first moment that we're reconnecting. She said, tell me one thing that nobody else knows about you. And I was like, well, I speak to a dead person. And she was like, oh, cool. Tell me about it. And I was like, oh, cool. So I went off on this tangent about Brian and all the information he's given me. And she goes, I want you to read this book. And she said, it's called Wisdom of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. Mm-hmm. She said, when you finish this, take notes, give it to me, and then we'll get together again. And I was like, well, I'm going to read it tonight. Right. So I get the book. I thought I was going to read it instantly. And I spent like 3 days on one page. And wow. I just was writing and journaling. And one of the first pages of that book said, if you're struggling with seated meditation, try a movement-based practice like yoga, Tai Chi, or Aikido. Now, I knew about Tai Chi. No one did it in my area. And I had no idea what Aikido was. I was a martial artist as a young kid, but I didn't know this specific cool martial art. Mm-hmm. But yoga, my stepmom was a yoga teacher. Never bothered to ask her what that was. So I went home and I called her up and I said, hey, can you tell me a little bit about yoga? Like, is it something I can come do with you? And she's like, well, I don't know about if I describe it, it's going to really help you, but maybe just come to a class. I'll give you my schedule. So I go over her house and she, on a little Post-it note, gave me her weekly schedule. And I was like, okay, I'm going to come tomorrow night, but I have to be in the city at this time. Can I leave early? And she's like, yeah, sure. So 10 minutes before you have to go, you're just going to lay down on your back and relax. And then you can leave when everybody else goes to lay on their back. And I was like, okay, whatever. So I show up and she goes, hey, you'll know after 3 sessions if you're going to like this practice, if this is for you. I was like, okay, cool. I get on the yoga mat. First Warrior 2, she puts us in, and I felt like the world shifted. Every cell in my being was like, yes. I felt powerful. I felt free. I felt strong. I felt like present. All the things that people crave, I think, in life, I felt in that one moment. It was clear. I don't know if everyone has that about yoga, but obviously not everyone becomes a yoga teacher that invests their entire life. So it was clear that this was my path, whatever it was. I wasn't thinking about teaching yoga, of course, but I was thinking about when can I do more of this? And I went down that list on a Post-it note and went every day after that I could possibly go to. And that led to as many classes I could possibly do with her, but it wasn't enough. So some of them were twice a day or whatever. So I was like, who else can I practice with? My best friend's mom was a teacher. I practiced with her. My best friend's mom had a friend who she suggested I practice with her. I started going to every possible free class that was offered at a gym or, first time at this studio or this studio. I just went to everything I possibly could with every teacher. And that was the start.
Do you remember, were there any guys? Were there any male teachers? You have Brian as a force in your life, as a male mentor. Did you feel any draw to go try to find, are there any yoga guys? Like, who's a cool yoga guy? Like maybe some of Brian's friends who are weird. Maybe they practice yoga. Can I get to one of them and find out if they know about this yoga?
No, most of those were women. Most of Brian's friends were women. And every single person I practiced with were female teachers at that point in time. So I didn't actually think men practiced yoga, really.
At this point, we've got to be like, where are we date
we're like,
year-wise?
Let's see. I was about 23 years old. I was 23 years old at this point in time. I'm 40 now. Let's do the math. 17 years before right now.
15 years before right now. Okay. So we're like mid 2000s.
Yeah.
5, 6, 7.
Probably
somewhere in
7.
there.
2007.
Okay,
let's say.
2007.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were doing this in Long Island?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Because in 2007, we're on the top of the wave of the yoga fad wave, right?
Yeah.
Like Baron Batiste, all these guys.
Yeah.
Brian Cast and like the LA wave and Yoga Works and all that stuff. So I would imagine that there are guys out there.
Yeah, so I was practicing Anusara Yoga, which I knew was founded by John Friend, which is a male. Anyway, I think what's interesting was that I'm practicing with all these female teachers. I'm not really thinking about being the only male. I'm only thinking about this is amazing, and I want to do more of it. And my teachers suggested I practice with a male teacher. So they said, hey, look, there's a great teacher in Manhattan. We think you should go practice with him so you can just get that male energy and learn, because they felt like from a physical standpoint, I definitely could benefit from learning from another male teacher. So they suggested Jordan Mala, who was an Anusara teacher at the time, but I never had an opportunity to practice with him at this point in time because the places he practiced at or taught at were mostly membership based. So let me just bring you, before we get back to Jordan Mala and how he pivoted my yoga career. I was at a party one night and I did what's called a keg stand. Some people know what this is, but nobody was holding my legs. And so I was doing a handstand on top of a keg while somebody was, feeding me the beer. So as you can kind of tell, I'm still in a real yin yang kind of environment. So
right.
Part of me,
You're
doing yoga.
Frat guy, yoga guy.
Yeah. It was a real schizo type of transition where on one side I was like, let me eat really healthy and do this yoga practice and feel really good. And then the other side, I'm a musician and I'm a rock star and I'm partying and whatever. But something about that moment triggered a whole bunch of my guy friends to go, wait, how did you just do that? And I was like, well, we do like kind of stuff like that in yoga. And they're like, I thought yoga was just stretching. Yeah. And I was like, oh no, I wasn't about to get into the discussion of
keg stands too.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to get into the discussion about like the mental side of things and the breath work and the spirituality. I knew that wasn't the route to talk about with them, but I was like, well, we do things like they're called arm balances where we balance on our hands. So they asked me to show them something. So I showed them a few arm balances and suddenly they all wanted to learn. They were all curious about it. Like, oh, I think they could see themselves doing that. One of them in particular was like, well, I want to learn this yoga stuff. And I was like, well, come to class with me. And they said, oh, I'm not going to a yoga studio. That's weird. And I was like, well, I can teach you then. I was like, and everyone in the group, there's, I think 6 guys and then a couple of girls mixed around but it was mostly a group of guys in this circle. So that's kind of fascinating that we're, having this conversation, but they said, yeah, I would like to learn. I was like, okay, cool. Well, how about Monday after, a lot of us were lifeguards. So after work, we'll go to my mom's basement and we'll practice. So 6 guys showed up. I taught a class. They loved it.
And you're practicing for how long at this point?
Oh, not very long. Not very long.
A year?
Yeah, approximately less than that, I would say.
Okay. But by my calculation, you're going like every minute, so you really know what you're talking about.
I wouldn't even say I knew what I talked about. I did a lot of it, and there was zero intent to teach yoga. I wasn't thinking about becoming a yoga teacher. All I knew was my friends wanted to do it. They didn't want to go to a yoga studio, and I wanted them to do it. Yeah. So my only choice, the way I saw it, was I figure out how to teach them. Yeah. So I didn't really think too hard. I just, the next day I asked my friend Noelle, I said, hey, Noelle, can I teach you just to see what I can, we did like 3 hours of yoga together. And she was like, that was great. I was like, okay, cool. So I felt fine. And the next day we did the session in the basement. 6 guys showed up. I was just copying what my stepmom said.
Totally.
Whatever. I mean,
it wasn't your voice at that point.
Literally was no ego involved. I wasn't trying to be a good teacher. I was just trying to get them to do yoga. Yeah. So that part's ego, I guess. But the reality is, as far as being a teacher, it's just what my stepmom said over and over again and just repeated it to them. Do this, do that, blah, blah. And they loved it. They're like, when can we do the next one? So we did one next week. They all brought friends. So now it was six guys and 6 girls, pretty much.
Yep.
So we had a mix. But still, we got 6 guys, which sometimes is
huge.
more than what we get, today.
Totally.
And then it wasn't enough to do it once a week. They wanted to do it twice a week. So we did it twice a week. Then it wasn't enough. We did it 3 nights, 4 nights. And it became people from all over Long Island were coming. And the big kicker that changed my career was that some Lululemon employees heard about it, were friends of friends. They came, and then they wanted me to teach at events. Certain teachers wanted me to sub their classes. And it just became this like snowball effect because I was teaching what my stepmom was teaching, which was more of an Anusara style, which was a lot of technique and giving people engage this muscle, do that thing. For me, that's the only way that I knew how to practice yoga. So there wasn't anything else. But at the time in Long Island, people were just kind of just doing vinyasa flow. There was no instruction.
Right.
It was just, warrior 1, warrior 2, reverse warrior, chaturanga.
Yeah.
Which didn't tell anybody how to do a posture. And so here I am repeating what my stepmom was teaching, just how to do each posture.
Yeah.
And I think for guys especially, that was welcomed because I think a lot of people when they come to yoga, especially guys, feel that they don't know what they're doing, don't know how to do it, feel inadequate, and don't have any strong guidelines of how to improve. And that can be, that can create a self-consciousness, and,
Totally.
and then you leave the class like, I feel like an idiot. Like I don't know what I did. Right. So the way that I was teaching was giving them those like strong guidelines, do this, do this, do this, do that. And then you get this. Right. And that, of course, my teaching developed because I was like, well, they couldn't do that. So how do I get them to do that? And then I just figured things out. How can I better say it or whatever? And that became my teaching style from that methodology.
Yeah.
But I think that was beneficial for a lot of people and it was unique at the time. Nobody was doing that on Long Island. And that's how I kind of spread around.
That's amazing in itself because it's so organic and natural the way you started as opposed to the way a lot of people start, which is like, I'm going to go get certified. I'm going to go teach, right? And it's like becomes this path. You were just simply showing this thing.
Yeah.
Number 1. Number 2, you're early in your journey, in your hero's journey, right? And you're early in your yoga path, less than a year, you were practicing yourself. But when you stepped onto the mat in front of 6, 12 people and started teaching and started using your voice as a teacher, do you remember how that felt? Do you remember it all feeling like, oh, fuck, this is fucking pretty cool, man. Like, I feel pretty good. Like, I see another dimension of it for myself,
What I remember most of that time is that words would come to me without me thinking about them.
Yeah.
And instruction would come out of my mouth and the right way to say something would fall out of me. All I would have to do is wait for it to come. It was such a fascinating experience to feel like I was being guided by somebody else speaking through me. That was the most unique aspect I remember when teaching. And I think because of that unique experience, I was really fortunate in that I wasn't trying to be a teacher. I wasn't in a teacher training scenario where I'm like fake teaching / trying to real teach. And it can be a difficult path for a lot of people when they first learn to teach because they want to teach and they're trying to be a certain way. And I was just not trying to do any of that. That wasn't my goal. I just was trying to help.
Do you still have that experience when you're teaching today, particularly in a live setting or an in-person setting, at a workshop or wherever, where you don't necessarily know what you're going to say next or something comes to you in the moment that you're like, I'm going to drop this bit of knowledge right here in between a sequence, right? Or something like that. Do you find that
so
still
normal.
happens?
Yeah, I think it's so normal now that it's not as miraculous. But what I need to do each time, I have a little, sometimes I'm driving the ship, intellectually, and I know there's a goal, and I've got a backlog of anatomy and ideas and whatever that I'm trying to, and other times I'm just letting it kind of flow through me. And neither one is better than the other necessarily. It's just a matter of knowing what's appropriate when, and also being able to step into either as it comes. You know, am I going to step into my intellect, or am I going to step into just the flow and let it come through me? Either way, you can find the flow. It's just a matter of, you know, what's the source? You know, is it my experience, or is it outside of myself? You know, whatever.
I ask sort of selfishly because I think I'm coming up on 4 years teaching now. You're obviously way past that point. I'm hoping that, you know, 10 years down the road, if I'm still teaching, I still get that, because I find that, you know, now, like, I'm in the midst of teaching and something comes out and I'm like, what the fuck? I don't even know what that was about.
I think a lot of teachers love that experience because it feels like you're doing yoga when you're not actually doing the physical practice.
You're in the flow with them. Right? Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of other dimensions to that you may have already tapped into or will tap into that is like that, where, you know, for example, when I'm instructing someone how to articulate a certain joint, I feel what they feel just from looking at them. And that's also another element of feeling like you're in the flow and you know, something beyond just this little minutia of my physical mental world, you know?
Yeah. Cool. All right. So let's get to Jordan.
Yeah. Interesting thing about Jordan. So I'm a sand sculptor now. My friend Andy Gertler, he's a world-class sand sculptor. He teaches me how to sand sculpt. And I started traveling around to different beaches where we got these jobs for companies to create these sand sculptures. Anyway, we're sand sculpting. And off to the right is a bunch of people doing what I now know, and what I didn't know until later that day was called acro yoga. And they're people on top of other people doing what looked like yoga. So I asked Andy, I was like, hey, can I just go talk with these people? He goes, okay, go ahead. So I walk over and I say, hi, is this yoga? And the girl, her name was Billy. She goes, yeah, it's called acro yoga. And I was like, can I try? She's like, sure. So she did this thing that's called basing, and she flew me. So I was the flyer, she was the base. And essentially, the first moment, my head is like in her crotch. I'm upside down. And I just remember feeling like I was in love. And I was like, with her, with the practice. And I was like, how do I get more of this experience? And I asked her, I was like, well, what do I do now? Where can I go from here? How do I do more? And she's like, well, there's classes in the city on Monday nights. So Monday night was the next night. I showed up. Billy wasn't there, but it was an acro yoga class, and what became my community of people for the next 5-10 years. And in this acro yoga world, I met somebody who, and all the acro yoga teachers were yoga teachers as well. So one of the yoga teachers, her name is Mary Rojas. She teaches in Manhattan. She asked if I would want to assist her restorative class at Pure Yoga in New York City. I looked at Pure Yoga's website, and Jordan Mala's on the schedule. So I said, well, do I get to take classes if I assist? And she said, yes. So I get now a membership for the summer to the membership studio that I wouldn't have been able to afford, where Jordan Mala is a teacher. And I remember looking at the schedule, couldn't quite line up Jordan Mala's classes, but I could take with a male teacher named Marco Rojas. Marco Rojas is still a powerful, powerful human being who has a voice that is loud, fierce, fiery, intense. But anyway, first class, I'm in the front row. He hasn't entered the room yet. I could feel as he was approaching the door was open, so it's not like he opened the door and I could feel the wind or something. But I was not facing the door, and I could just feel that his presence was close. And then I could feel like that he entered the room. It was, one of those moments of like, is this happening? So then I turned around, and there he was, smiling, opening up conversations with people. Hello, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. And I just was like, whoa. And I knew in that moment this was my teacher. After the first class, I was amazed. I never felt something so intense in my life. I mean, all I remember is him yelling for the whole class pretty much. But he turned to me and said, "That's a nice one, Matt." And the fact that he remembered my name from just meeting me once in a class of 60, 70 people, and and gave me a moment, the time, and looked at me and singled me out.
Acknowledged.
Felt acknowledged, and I felt like, oh wow. But I had already felt that he was my teacher before that moment, so that was like this validating moment. And by the end of the summer, I'm just gonna fast forward. I had taken a bunch of his classes. My time of assisting was up, which meant my membership was up. And I was talking to Marco, and I just said, "Hey, Marco, I would love to keep taking your classes, but I'm no longer able to assist Mary, so this is going to be my last class." And he says, "Well, here's what we'll do. You come, you watch, observe, practice sometimes, and when you feel ready, you can assist." And I was like, oh, wasn't even asking that question. So every single class, and he taught a lot of classes, from that day forward, I showed up, I took notes, I observed, I watched the way he conducted, I watched the way he assisted. A couple months later, after sitting in every one of his classes, it was a 108 sun salutation event, and he goes, "It's time." Meaning it's time for me to assist. So just watching 108 sun salutations. Now I'm assisting for however many hours that is. My body was toast after that event, but I had tremendous amount of practice in that one class. So if anyone received, listening to this, that received an assist, thank you for the opportunity to practice on you. I apologize if something was not great. Anyway, now that we got that out of the way, he became my mentor. I became an assistant of his, and I assisted every single class of his for years. And that is how I became a yoga teacher, because one day he didn't show up. And he was on vacation. The studio thought he was back. There was only one person in the studio, and that was the manager. And she had just finished teaching a hot class. And I said, "Well, I can teach it." And the front desk called down to her, and she said, "Yeah, sure, let him teach it." And one of the reasons she said yes was because the day before I had flew her in acro yoga, and she had the time of her life. She was like, "This is great," trusted me. So just figured I knew what I was doing. So I teach the class. I know I had a good amount of experience now, because this is after having those basement classes that I was, and all the substituting and everything. So I teach this class. Everybody knows my face. Everybody's gotten hands-on adjustments, had a little conversation. So the whole room trusts me, which was hugely beneficial to me.
Are you teaching acro yoga?
No, I'm teaching.
I'm
teaching what Marco taught.
Okay.
It was a mixture of, he trained a number of different people, including Alan Finger, including John Friend, but also was part of the first Yoga Works training. There was a bunch of teachers that came out of that training that were excellent, and they had a specific hold, move style. It was alignment and flow, and it would just go back and forth. And it's still to this day, I think, one of the best ways to practice vinyasa. It just feels amazing, because as soon as you get sick of holding a posture, you move, and then as soon as you get sick of moving, you hold. And anyway, so I taught one of his style classes in the way that I, mixed with my very Anusara heavy approach, and people loved it. And I was, of course, fortunate in that moment that they loved it. And after class, they said, "Yeah, well, you should teach here." And I said, "Well, please tell the front desk if you feel that way. That would be, helpful to me. I would love to teach here." And they got, I think it was like 27 comment cards. And the manager has the stack of comment cards on the desk. She calls me and she goes, "We've never received this from anybody, even close to this positive comment cards. It's always the opposite way."
Yeah.
And she's like, "We'd love to hire you." And I was like, "Great." And she was like, "Where did you train?" I was like,
"You're like downstairs."
My stepmom. I don't know. I didn't have an answer. And she was like, "So you don't have a certification?" I was like, "No." She's like, "Well, liability standpoint, we can't." She's like, "You're obviously a great teacher, but we can't certify, or we can't let you teach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire you, but you can't teach until you get certified." And I was like, "Okay." And then the next day she's like, "We have a training, the first one coming up for this studio we've ever done, and we'd love to have you in it." And I was like, "That's great, but I don't have it was like $4,500. I was like, I don't have any money. I'm broke. I'm a musician, still in the band, by the way. And so she goes, well, let's see what we can do. My mentor, Marco, and Mary Aranas, and my other teacher mentor, Chris Loebsack, and a few other teachers band together, and they did a movie night showing one of Iyengar's movies, Light on Yoga movie or whatever. I forget what it's called, something like that. And raised donations, and I got a very large scholarship, and the rest I paid off, or was supposed to pay off, in working at the front desk. And I never worked at the front desk, the timing never worked out. In any case, the manager said, well, I think that your time would be better used teaching classes. So maybe you work it off teaching classes for us, which was great. And at the same time, of course, those 2 classes I taught for years and years for free until long past the point that I should be paying for. I probably paid that training 5 times over in the amount of free classes I taught. But at the same time, they were adding on paid classes. So my career was building financially as well, but I was also still teaching those 2 free classes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's intense, man. That's awesome. What a great story.
Thank you.
I want to know, in terms of guys, what do you see are the biggest barriers for guys getting into yoga?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first barrier, of course, is most guys are seeing women doing yoga, and it's hard to see someone of the opposite sex be really good at something. And that's unfortunate, of course, societally speaking, but that's the truth as it stands, I think, for a lot of people. And the fear of getting into something and being bad at it right away, I think, holds a lot of guys back as well. Also, not knowing really what yoga can provide for them. Just thinking like, oh, it's a bunch of stretching. And I think the hardest thing about the idea of getting someone into yoga, and this is, I think, why I felt so called to teach in the beginning when those people asked me, is that people don't know what they're going to get, and it's almost impossible to explain that your life is going to be way better after you practice this. And I think that is a tough sell. But let me put it this way. If you're a human being, in this case, we're talking about males, who want to feel better physically, mentally, and emotionally, you want to heal from injuries and understand your body on a deeper level, which would ultimately improve your posture, of course, and take away a tremendous amount of physical pain that we go through because we're lacking awareness in a certain area, or lacking the ability to assess and diagnose ourselves because we're not willing to feel certain aspects of our body, or we just don't have practices or tools that guide us to sensation in that way. Look, if you want to learn how to do a military press, that's awesome. But at the same time, if you don't understand the biomechanics of how your shoulders work and you just understand the mechanics of a military press, there's a big fundamental difference. You will always be inferior to the you that understands the biomechanics of your body and the mechanics of a military press. If you understand 2 aspects of, the intrinsic or the internal piece of the puzzle and the external, tool, or let's say skill, whether it's athleticism or lifting weights or cycling or whatever it is that you also do, this will only enhance that thing that you do. And as a byproduct, you'll feel better mentally, emotionally, physically, improve your body awareness, be able to figure out why you're having that ache or pain, those long-lasting pains that you have that are chronic and the doctor says will never go away or whatever. It's amazing. Just a little bit of body awareness can transform that in such a big way. So it's I don't know how else to say it would be huge, but what's the barrier? Probably just simply not knowing what to expect. And I will say this, that there are a tremendous amount of different types of yoga practices out there. The best thing to do is just talk to someone first who who does yoga. Try whatever they say to try, just because you need an entry point. You can certainly research styles. I know a lot of my friends refer friends of friends, whatever, to me, guy friends, saying, hey, what can I do? I'm in New Orleans, how do I practice it? And what do I practice? and I asked them before just putting my opinion, I just asked them, what do you want to do with it? Why? Or, I know you want to practice. So what, some of them will say pain management. Some will say posture. Some will say my doctor said so, my low back, my knee, whatever.
Yeah.
I want to do something low impact that still has health benefits. And then we try to find a yoga practice that is suitable for them, and teachers and styles that work for them. I teach what's called chromatic yoga, where we are always focused on body awareness first and education of the physical body first before we're focused on the sport itself of yoga and let's just admit the physical practice has become a sport, and that's okay.
Yep.
But what makes it yoga is that self-reflective quality of learning self-awareness of this physical form. So where do you start? I think you start with just talking to the one person that maybe does yoga, and it will trickle out from there. And have a moment of courage to just do something that is outside your comfort zone, that is different, that is unusual, that maybe makes you feel like you're bad at it. And just within a few times of feeling bad and feeling uncomfortable and uneasy, that will lead you to feeling confident, better, and honestly, like a skill that it is attainable for you.
All right. Well, Matt, dude, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. We went above and beyond time-wise here that I told you we were going to do, and I really appreciate you hanging in there and sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us. And it's been an honor, dude.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me here. I'm happy to have this conversation, and thanks to everybody that listens.